Yo, what up, everybody? Welcome back to the Orange Bloods Texas Football YouTube channel. And, well, it's official. It's officially official, even though Gary Patterson's already been working for the Texas staff for weeks. It's now official. He is the special assistant to Steve Sarkisian, not to be confused with the special assistant to the head coach.
I try to do like the assistant to the regional managers
Exactly.
from the office. Yes.
The special assistant, Gary Patterson, or I guess it'd be the special assistant, Steve Sarkisian, or special assistant to
Starting to get confused.
At any rate, it's a joke flop. Okay. It's a flop joke.
It landed so bad, Ari. I don't even, when someone's got to help you with the joke, that's how you know how bad the joke is. Just don't do it. Don't do it.
Before we get started, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel where we are giving you full access to everything Texas Longhorns football, basketball, and beyond. But now that it's official, Gary Patterson's on staff in a non-on-field role, sort of a new role for Texas. I mean, what's your feeling on this, Anwar?
Well, it's first of all, thank God it finally announced it. It's like the worst kept secret on the 40 acres. I mean, the guy's sitting in Del Conte's booth on Monday at a basketball game. You're like, all right. I mean, he's wearing a Longhorn logo. Look, I think it's clearly was a necessary move that, because when you look at the defense and how they struggled, all throughout last year, when you start thinking about how many guys could you really say got better as the season went along, there was some things that, they need some help. They need someone that, fresh set of eyes. And, whether this is driven by Sarkisian or whether this is driven by Del Conte. That being said, the defense is Gary Patterson's specialty. There was too many times. The one thing we saw last year, Ari, we went from an era of Tom Herman. The one thing he was able to do is have close games. Now they didn't win them, but they were able to have close games. And then we went to seeing Texas kind of getting blown out, which is something we hadn't seen in a really long time. Really hadn't seen since the Charlie Strong era. We started seeing Texas getting blown out. Now the thing I always said about Tom Herman, Ari, was Tom Herman wasn't hired to make Texas feel good about close losses. He was hired to ultimately win. Okay. And so, then we got to the point of, okay, now we're just getting, you're seeing Texas get blown out. You're like, well, this ain't good. So having a guy to come in to kind of shore it up a little bit, extra set of eyes. Sarkisian said he would be more involved, Ari, in the offseason and this year. Having Patterson involved, definitely helps. There's definitely going to be some interesting dynamics going forward, and it'll be to see how all of this works. Like, how does Pete K feel about a guy that essentially could be the DC in waiting? How does Sarkisian feel about potentially having a guy on here could be the head coach in waiting if things don't really turn around over the next few years? It's a lot to kind of, digest, but, ultimately it's probably a positive move.
So when I saw the picture of Patterson with Del Conte at the game, I couldn't help but think about the conversation that you and Ketch had when this was a possibility, like before it was even happening, when you guys talked about the possibility of Patterson joining the staff. I remember the video where you guys were talking about, like, man, could Sark be hiring his actual replacement here? Because, it's Chris Del Conte was Gary Patterson's boss at TCU. I don't think Del Conte hired Patterson. I think that was the predecessor, but was obviously his boss there for quite some time. So it's a very interesting dynamic. I'm interested in this because Patterson could have gotten a DC job. He could have gotten an on-field job. So I'm surprised why he didn't. Certainly, I think the role that they had for him is one that he was intrigued by, and maybe that was why he didn't take a DC job somewhere. It's so interesting too. I did a video with you where we talked about, like, was it too many cooks in the kitchen? And like, I think this role is a really good role for him from a standpoint of Texas has not gotten the most out of their talent. Texas has taken a lot of 4- and 5-star kids. And in some cases, those kids have gone undrafted. TCU has been the opposite. And Ketch and I talked about that, when it comes to guys that were under-recruited, the development of those players under Gary Patterson has been incredible, and turning them into NFL prospects. Ochon Mathis is the latest, but there's been a lot of them. And so, like, in that capacity, having a guy that has a proven track record of identifying talent and then developing that talent and getting the most out of them Like that's going to serve Texas with their high level recruits in a tremendous way. So yeah, I mean, get your popcorn ready in terms of like all of the drama that could unfold if the defense, is not very good to start this season. And those calls are going to come very, very quickly for Patterson to take over the defense. And, so there's a lot here, but just in terms of like the GM role is how I understand it in that capacity, identifying talent, developing that talent, that to me is going to be tremendous. And it sort of leads to the idea of how many of these guys that have been here that haven't started to develop, like, could there be guys that start to develop? Like we heard, Tope Amade talk about, man, if only, if only this staff had been here before, I would have, that would have helped me develop. And so now you've got a coach here that can really help some of these defensive players develop, especially maybe some of these guys that are coming into their second years with Texas.
Yeah, the thing that helps, Ari, is that Patterson is probably going to be extremely familiar with most of these guys on defense, whether he tried to recruit them or they were aware of them, or, he scouted them, and in that capacity. So for the most part, he should know what the majority of these guys can or cannot do. And he should know, as a guy who scouted against him, he can say, like, this is what I thought the weaknesses were. Yes. Like, this is exactly where I saw it. This is where I attacked. And these are the reasons why. And this is why we went to this particular side or that particular side and went after these particular players or whatever it may be. He can tell them, like, yeah, this is it. You get it from opposing view. And that ends up being, extremely valuable to them. And also, I'll still continue to say it's a win-win for Gary Patterson. If things go well, Ari, who gets the credit? Who gets the credit for it?
Right. Special assistant.
Yes. Okay. If things go wrong and this defense doesn't get better, who gets the blame for it?
Kwiatkowski.
Right. So no matter what, if you're Gary Patterson, you're sitting in the catbird seat because no matter what happens, you are in the win-win position. And let me say something also here, Ari, that you may be familiar with. I'm going to say a name that the majority of people may not know it, but let me say the name Jerry Kill. Okay. And you're going to say, all right, yes. Okay. TCU. What are you talking about there? Jerry Kill was the special assistant to the head coach in charge of offense. Right. And then when Gary Patterson and TCU parted ways, who became the interim head coach? Was it any of the other assistant coaches that were on staff? It was Jerry Kill. Gary Patterson holds a title that's special assistant to the head coach. He already knows what this means, as ends up being the guy in waiting. The only question becomes, is he the guy in waiting for DC position, head coaching position? Maybe it's a guy waiting for somewhere else, because if everything goes well at Texas, it's a non-point. It's not an issue. Gary Patterson goes on to, greener pastures somewhere else, right? But there's a little bit of irony to it when we start thinking about the long-term ramifications, right? That for him having essentially the same title, and that guy took over.
And that's like, for me, that was my jumping off point for like this, this could be the too many cooks in the kitchen thing, because that TCU situation was weird. You have an offensive coordinator in Sonny Cumbie, and like, that seems like a pretty defined role. You coordinate the offense, that goes through you. But then, they bring in Doug Meacham is there. And so he's sort of like quarterback's coach, but also like his role was kind of undefined in terms of like his design of the offense. And then they brought in Jerry Kill. And it was like, well, this is an offensive guy. They have a history here. So like, that's the whole too many cooks in the kitchen thing. Like, that's a bizarre situation. Who's calling the plays? Who's designing the game plan? Like, and I mean, so that very well could end up being a situation that presents itself at Texas when it comes to, if the defense struggles out of the gate. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this gets handled. But you're right. I mean, it's a win-win for GP. And I do think maybe he looked at this job as opposed to taking a DC job somewhere else and said, this is probably my quickest path to getting another head coaching job. If I go and take a DC job at Oklahoma State, for instance, I could be there for a little bit. And maybe I don't even get another head coaching job. But if I come here and I develop the talent and this team starts to win a little bit, then yeah, people are gonna be looking at the special assistant and a guy that, has a statue already in Fort Worth and saying maybe he should take over my program. So I love the current role for him. I think that there's the potential for a ton of drama here, and knowing Texas football, there most certainly will be, but we're in the off season, and Anwar, this has got to be like a near perfect off season for Sark. When you consider, I mean, it's not even February yet, and everybody's forgotten about 5-7. 5-7 is like, no, from a talent perspective, from a recruiting perspective, from a coaching perspective. You guys talked about Brendan Marion yesterday and the role that played, in landing Neyor. So I'd say this is about as good of an offseason as Sark could have possibly had. Like, everything he would have wanted and Texas fans would have wanted has happened. Yeah,
I want to see if I can find this real quick in real time, because I want to make sure I give this person some credit. There's a guy by the name of Aaron Sims on Twitter, had a really good tweet, and his Twitter handle is horns41111. So I don't want to steal anyone's thoughts, because I thought it was a really good original thought, but it kind of plays on what you said. He said, Sarkisian's first full off season, he's hired Brendan Marion as a wide receivers coach. He's hired Tashard Choice as a running backs coach. He's hired Gary Patterson as well. And he talked about, Quinn Ewers coming in, Jahleel Billingsley, Isaiah Neyor, like to your point. Then there was one guy that he admits, Ryan Watts comes in.
The offensive line recruits.
Yeah, so a top 5 recruiting class. So to your point, and like I said, Aaron, want to make sure I give you your props and your credit there as well. It has been a hell of an offseason. Like, if you just start from there, like what it's looked like since that final game up until now, you've got to say it's an impressive offseason. Time will tell what all this means. And I always said, what they always say, it's easy to win the offseason, right? Everybody wins in the offseason. You'll be doing shows, in August, and you'll hear about everyone you'll talk to will talk about how things are different, right? So easy to win.
Best camp, I'm in the best shape I've ever been in.
Yes. Yes, we got the team together, everyone, there's new camaraderie. There was a barbecue at such and such house, all these new coaches that are in, like, feeling so great. Like, that the last team wasn't as together as this team, like all these things, yes. These cliches, right? I always say it's easy to win the offseason, but when we, objectively though, he is doing it really well. He's doing a really good job. He's doing stuff where, like I said, it's usually not the formula for success when you're coming off a 5-7 program. And but yes, it does look good that hiring of Patterson looks good. And last thing I'll say on the whole situation is, Ari, coaches always want to talk about how competition is good for the room. Right? They always want to talk about, man, it's, we're going to bring in more guys and more guys and more guys because competition is good for the receiver position. Competition is good for the quarterback room, all that type of stuff. Well, maybe in this instance, competition is good for the coaching situation. Maybe the competition is good for the coaching position. Maybe, just maybe, having to look over your shoulder, knowing Gary Patterson's in the office every single day, a guy that could take your job. Maybe that brings out the best in everyone. Now, like you said, there's a point that could be, hey, there could be too many cooks in the kitchen, but it also could be like, hey, there's enough cooks here that will show that if you don't get the job done, you could be out. And so maybe they may be having Gary Patterson there as a guy who's, who has the reputation, who has the skins on the wall, who's accomplished so much. Yeah, maybe having him there ultimately helps Texas to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. There's two ways. There's two sides of that coin. It's just, I'm just like, I think Sark, this is one of the things he's going to have to manage. Like, I'm sure this already happened in terms of Kwiatkowski and Patterson getting together to kind of go over, just like chain of command, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's Pete Kwiatkowski's defense. Gary Patterson has never, in a long time, taken a back seat in terms of like what the defense should look like and how it should be run. And so, like, I know Patterson has his philosophies on defense. Kwiatkowski has his philosophies on defense. It's Kwiatkowski's defense at this point, but Patterson's going to have some pointers. And so, it could be an ego clash, but beyond that, like, Could get messy, but to your point, it could also be successful. And one of those things where it brings out the competition brings out the best. But at the end of the day, next season could end with Gary Patterson as the defensive coordinator of the Texas Longhorns.
Yeah.
Because he's a brilliant defensive mind. And this role currently seems to suit his ability to identify and develop talent, but it doesn't satisfy how good he's been as a tactician or, somebody that develops schemes on the defense side of the ball. And the hope is that he just adds to Kwiatkowski, like gives him different looks, but doesn't say, well, this is actually kind of defense you should be running, not this defense that you're running, not like a complete overhaul, just like, well, maybe pointers on this style of defense, but we'll see.
Those meetings are going to be really interesting.
And to Sark, Sark's job kind of depends on his ability to manage this situation, because you've got a guy that's won a lot of football games as a head coach, as a statue at Fort Worth, that, it's like a Game of Thrones situation. And could Patterson be the one sitting in the Iron Throne when it's all said and done?
I don't know, but it'll be interesting. All those meetings will be interesting. It'll be interesting to find out how they handle that situation, Ari.
All right. That's Anwar Richardson. I'm Ari Temkin. I'm sure we will get a reaction from Jeff Ketchum at some point here on the Orange Bloods Texas Football YouTube channel to the Gary Patterson hire. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you're in the know for all the videos. And of course, like the video. But for now, we're out. Peace.